everyone, Kristina here. Welcome to day 20 of the holiday card series for 2015. Today I'm starting out with 4 different colors of pigment ink from Avery Elle. I'm going to be using these straight onto my cardstock. And the first color I'm using is Vino. It's a nice dark burgundy red color. I'm swiping that across my white cardstock, leaving brush strokes almost. And I'm using the corners of the ink pad to create some nice edges. And I'm just making this a really kind of dry brush type look. The next color I'm using is Cherry. It's a nice bright red. And then I followed that with Lemongrass. This is kind of a more vibrant, kind of a lime green color. The last color I'm using is Mint to Be. It's a nice mint color, really, really pretty. I love this color palette for holiday cards because you've got your traditional red and green, but it's different tones of those colors. I think it looks really fun and it's just a nice color combination. I'm going to show you what these colors are just so you know the color names. It's Lemongrass, Mint to Be, Cherry, and Vino. I'm going to be doing some stamping on top of this and then embossing those images. So I wanted to make sure that this pigment ink was very, very dry because pigment ink is actually a great ink to use if you want to emboss the images that you've stamped. However, I don't want any of this pigment ink to actually emboss. So I'm making sure it's very, very dry. And I'm also testing it out. I put on some EK Success powder tool, just a light coating of powder to kind of cut any of that static cling, and I'm testing it with the embossing powder that I will eventually use after I've stamped my images. And you'll notice that some of the silver embossing powder is sticking around, so I'm doing lots and lots of drying it with my heat tool and putting more powder tool on top, brushing off any of that embossing powder with a dry brush before I move on to the next step. I'm using the Comfort and Joy stamp set from Winnie and Walter, and it's got these fun star images, a large star that has a wood grain pattern on it, and then 3 other stars. I'm going to use 2 of those solid stars, and I place them on my cardstock here. I'm going to pick them up all at once with my stamp press, prep that area with my powder tool once again, and then I'm going to be using some Versamark ink to stamp these stars. Like pigment ink, Versamark ink stays wet for a long time, so it's a wonderful ink to use when you're going to be doing heat embossing. I'm pressing those stamps down onto my paper, and Versamark is a clear ink, so you're not going to be able to see it, but once I start sprinkling on that silver embossing powder and shake it off, you'll be able to see those stars. Tapping my cardstock to make sure it shakes off any of that excess. And then for areas where I just wasn't able to get a nice clean application of that powder, I'm using a dry paintbrush to swipe away any of those powder bits. Just sweeping that away with a nice flat brush with a chiseled edge. And then I used my heat tool to heat the embossing powder until it was melted and smooth. Now it has a really fun silver metallic texture. I'm also using the Season's Greetings stamp from that same stamp set and doing the same steps. I stamped it in Versamark ink, applied the silver embossing powder, and then heat set that until it was completely melted. I trimmed down that piece so it was slightly smaller than an A2 card, and now I'm going to be prepping my card base. The cardstock I'm using today is Desert Storm cardstock from Nina. This is the 100-pound version, so it's a little bit thicker for a little more heft for my card base. I like to have a nice thick card base. Using my Teflon bone folder to smooth out the fold. And then I'm taking the diagonal stripe background stamp from Simon Says Stamp. This is one of my favorite striped background stamps, especially for the holidays because it just makes me think of candy canes for some reason. I thought it would be fun to have different colors of stripes, and I was trying to figure out a way that I could ink up this large background stamp with all 4 of my pigment ink colors, and this was the solution that I came up with. I started with some just computer paper, some printer paper, placed that down onto that striped area and inked up the corner in the Vino pigment ink. Then I flipped that paper around, moved it down a little bit so another section was revealed on the stamp, and then I took the cherry color, and this time I'm pressing it down only on the side where the paper is, because I wanted to get that red ink along that side so it's nice and sharp. And then I'll eventually go back and do the area that's right up next to that previous color. For now, I'm only focusing on the area that's right up onto the paper, making sure I'm getting a nice even coating of that ink. And then I'll be taking the ink pad and very, very carefully applying it up against that darker red color. So I'm going to rotate the stamp so it's a little bit easier to see. And it's off camera so you can't see, but I am leaning down and putting my eyes right on level with the stamp pad or the ink pad and the stamp, so that I can see where the edge of that stamp is pressing down, or edge of the ink pad is pressing down onto the stamp. So I did the same thing with the green area, except this time I started by getting the stripe up next to the red first, and then I took some scratch paper to mask off the bottom area. And then for this last corner, I didn't need the paper at all. I just put my eyes down on eye level with the stamp and inked up that area right next to the green. So I'm going to press my card base onto the large background stamp. Then I'm putting a piece of paper over the top, just another one, and this allows me to use my fingertips to press that cardstock into the background stamp really, really well and evenly. I'll lift that up and you'll be able to see those stripes. Now, because I took my time and I had quite a bit of time between inking up the stamp and then actually stamping it, it wasn't the most even impression of the ink, but I'm okay with that because it was on craft cardstock and it looks a little bit rustic anyway. Put some foam adhesive on the back of that brush stroked piece, and then press that down onto my card base. And that finishes the card for today. This is a really simple card. If you wanted to make a bunch of Christmas cards like this, I would recommend doing those 4 colors of swiping with your ink pad first, letting all of it dry, maybe overnight, and then moving on with the card. Then you won't have to worry about any of the embossing powder sticking. Thanks so much for watching today's video, and I will see you guys in the next holiday card series video. On screen are 6 more card videos for you to check out. These are all holiday cards from the previous years of the holiday card series. If you'd like to see any of these videos, you can click on screen right now or check out the links in the video description below. I've got a couple videos for you this week still. Tomorrow we have our mail call video for the month of November 2015, and then I'll be back on Friday with day 21 of the holiday card series. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.